The chamber of the Galactic Concord shimmered with pale blue light, reflections rippling across the polished stone floor like currents beneath a storm. Every species represented there carried its own history, its own pride, its own secrets. But when General Varkun of the Karth Dominion stepped forward, the atmosphere tightened as if the very air recoiled from him. His armor clattered softly with each movement, black plates edged in silver, a silent reminder of the thousands of battles he had survived. He stood with predatory confidence, the kind possessed only by those who had never been forced to question their own dominance. When he finally spoke, his voice echoed with jagged precision that sliced through the hall's uneasy quiet. "Humans," he declared, sweeping his gaze across the assembly, "are the most cowardly species the galaxy has ever tolerated." Murmurs erupted instantly. Some delegates shifted, others stiffened, but only the human delegation remained perfectly still. Commander Ilara Miles, leading the small Terran envoy, felt the words burn into her consciousness. She was used to diplomatic tension, but this was different. This was accusation sharpened into open provocation. Ilara had spent her life navigating the fragile boundaries between peace and conflict. She had the steady patience of someone who believed in cooperation, yet carried the hardened instinct of a strategist shaped by years of hostile borders and unpredictable encounters. Her posture remained composed, but her pulse hammered with a deep, simmering heat. She studied Varkun carefully, recognizing not arrogance but intent. He wanted a reaction. He wanted humanity to stumble, to prove his words true. Instead, she breathed deeply and held her silence. Varkun leaned forward, savoring the tension he had summoned. "You cling to hope as if it shields you. You cling to peace as if it strengthens you. But hope is weakness. Peace is fear disguised." He raised a clawed hand toward Ilara and her team. "And when we come for terror, your people will kneel." The words hung, suspended, heavy enough to bend the room's energy around them. Ilara knew the Dominion had been expanding aggressively, testing borders, pushing smaller civilizations into vassalage. They needed a final push, something dramatic, something symbolic, to ignite full conquest. And now they had chosen their spark. She watched as the Karth general turned his back, as if already dismissing humanity from relevance. Her hand curled into a fist at her side, nails digging into her palm. She forced her breathing to slow. She forced her anger to settle. The galaxy believed humans were fragile because humanity had always strived for empathy before violence, diplomacy before destruction. But fragility was not their weakness. It was their reminder of what they fought to protect. Later, aboard the Terran flagship Aurora's Edge, Ilara stood in the central council chamber surrounded by holographic projections of Dominion movements and intercepted transmissions. The unified Earth Council had gathered virtually, their forms flickering with faint distortions as they connected from different worlds and stations. Councillor Havers, his features lined with age and experience, studied her with weary eyes. "Commander, is there any path toward negotiation?" Ilara replayed Varkun's threat in her mind, the calculated cruelty behind it. "No," she answered quietly. He wanted to end any illusions of peace. "Then what do you advise?" Another councillor asked, her tone steady but strained. Ilara stepped closer to the central display, where a hologram of Earth rotated slowly, serene and vulnerable. She had grown up beneath its skies, had watched storms roll across the oceans from orbital stations, had believed humanity's greatest turning point would be unity, not war. She spoke not only as a commander, but as someone carrying the weight of billions. "Humanity has been challenged," she said, "not for territory or resources, for our right to exist as equals among the stars." She lifted her head, her voice gaining strength. "The Dominion believes we will cower. They believe we will let fear define us. But they misunderstand the very core of who we are." She looked at each council member, letting the gravity of the moment settle fully before she continued. Humanity does not run from fear. We rise through it, she inhaled, steadying herself before, delivering the words she knew would mark the beginning of something irreversible. I propose we declare full mobilization, not for conquest, not for retaliation, but to defend the freedom of every Terran and every ally who stands with us, silent, stretched, heavy yet resolute. Slowly, one by one, the council members nodded. The decision formed like a distant rumble of thunder, inevitable, powerful, unstoppable. Ilara felt a mixture of sorrow and resolve settle into her heart. She did not want this war. None of them did. But when faced with annihilation or surrender, only one path honored who they were. When she gave the final confirmation order, a quiet tremor passed through her. It was not fear. It was the weight of choosing to protect what she loved, even at the cost of everything she had ever known. Messages were dispatched. Fleets were mobilized. Civilians and soldiers alike felt the shift in the air, the subtle recognition that history had reached its tipping point. And as the declaration spread across the Terran systems, as humanity braced itself for the greatest challenge it had ever faced, one truth settled across the stars with the certainty of dawn breaking through darkness. The last war had begun, and humanity would not enter it quietly. Ilara knew the road ahead would demand sacrifice, pain, and resilience beyond measure. Yet even as uncertainty loomed, she felt something fierce and unyielding ignite within her, a spark no insult could extinguish. For the first time since Varkun spoke his challenge, Ilara allowed herself a small, grim smile. The Dominion believed humanity would kneel. They were about to learn how deeply they had miscalculated. The Terran fleets mobilized with a speed that surprised even their own commanders. Yet the weight of the Dominion's coming assault pressed heavily on every mind. Commander Ilara Miles spent each waking hour analyzing data streams, mapping potential invasion routes, and studying the psychological patterns of the enemy that had forced humanity into a war it never desired. Exhaustion clung to her, but she refused to let it dull her judgment. Her crew had begun to look at her not merely as a strategist, but as the anchor holding their morale together. She carried that responsibility with quiet determination, aware that fear spread quickly in confined corridors and could unravel even the most disciplined unit if left unchecked. The first true test arrived when intelligence confirmed that the Dominion had seized a chain of outer relay stations, cutting communications to several colonies. Ilara listened to the transmitted recordings, frantic voices, broken signals, and abrupt silence. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing until the final message faded. When she turned to her officers, her expression was steady, revealing only the resolve that kept her moving. Lieutenant Rowe, usually composed, showed a flicker of anxiety. If they control the relays, they can sever half our defensive grid. Ilara nodded, already calculating. Which is why we take them back before their hold solidifies. The longer we hesitate, the more ground we surrender. The mission to reclaim the relays revealed just how quickly the Dominion adapted. Their ships were positioned with ruthless precision, as if anticipating every human maneuver. Ilara's fleet arrived in tight formation, engines humming with restrained power. But the Dominion vessels unleashed a barrage the moment the humans dropped out of hyperspace. The first minutes were chaos. Shields crackled under fire. Metal groaned as impacts resonated through the hulls. But Ilara's voice cut through the noise, issuing orders with clarity that steadied every trembling heartbeat on the bridge. She read the rhythm of the battle as though deciphering a familiar pattern, identifying the Dominion's overconfidence and using it to carve narrow openings for counterattacks. The humans fought viciously, driven not by conquest, but by the primal determination to protect one another. A support cruiser took a hit that shattered its starboard thrusters, sending it spiraling. Ilara made the split-second decision to divert one of her escort ships to stabilize it, even though it weakened her front line. Some commanders would have pressed forward, accepting the loss as inevitable, but Ilara valued people over numbers, and her crew recognized that distinction as the reason they trusted her completely. The maneuver succeeded, and the rescued cruiser rejoined formation, its crew flooding the channel with grateful acknowledgments that lifted the spirits of every listener. Gradually, through disciplined coordination and relentless pressure, the Terran fleet regained control of the relays. Dominion ships fell back, their retreat abrupt and sharp, suggesting that they viewed the skirmish not as a defeat, but as a test. Ilara knew the enemy hadn't truly been trying to win. They had been measuring humanity's response, probing for weaknesses. That realization settled heavily in her mind as she surveyed the battered but functional fleet. Every victory carried a warning. The Dominion was learning, adapting, and preparing for something far larger than these preliminary clashes. Back aboard the Aurora's edge, the atmosphere felt suspended between triumph and dread. Engineers hurried to repair scorched plating and overloaded systems. Medics tended to the injured, and quiet conversations filled the corridors with a subdued intensity. Ilara walked among her crew, offering brief words of encouragement, noting the fatigue etched into their expressions. She felt it too, the mental strain, the relentless pressure, but she buried it beneath discipline. Her presence needed to be a source of stability, not another sign of the burden they carried. Later, in the dim strategy chamber, she studied the Dominion's latest movements. The red indicators drifting across the holographic map formed a disturbing pattern. The enemy wasn't scattering after setbacks, but narrowing into increasingly deliberate formations. Their next objective was unmistakable. Lieutenant Rowe joined her, eyes tracing the same ominous lines. "They're preparing for a direct push," he muttered. Ilara exhaled slowly. "Yes, and when they strike, it won't be a probing assault. It will be decisive." Rowe hesitated before speaking again. "Do you ever think Varkun wanted this outcome from the beginning? Not just war, this war?" Ilara considered the question. The memory of the general's declaration in the conquered chamber resurfaced, heavy with implication. "He needed a symbol," she answered. "A rival to crush publicly. By calling us cowards, he staked his reputation on breaking us. That means he won't stop until he proves himself." "Right." She looked at the map again. The Dominion's tightening formation forming a noose around vulnerable systems. But arrogance creates blind spots. He expects us to panic. He expects us to scatter. We won't. As the ship's lights dimmed to night cycle, Ilara remained at the map table, planning, adjusting, refining. The next confrontation would shape the course of the entire war. She felt the future pressing toward her, immense and dangerous, yet she stood firm, her resolve hardening into something unshakable. When the Dominion came again, humanity would be ready, not out of pride, but because surrender was never an option for those fighting to preserve a future worth living in. The Dominion's final advance began with a silence so complete it unsettled even the most seasoned Terran officers. Commander Ilara Miles stood at the command platform of the Aurora's edge, watching the holographic display as countless red signatures emerged from the void like a spreading eclipse. Every ship in the Dominion fleet moved with the cold precision of a species raised for conquest. Their formation revealed unmistakable intent. They had come not merely to win, but to annihilate. Ilara's crew waited for her signal, their faces tense yet unwavering, each of them aware that this battle would determine the future of every human world. She felt their trust, their fear, and their hope all converging on her. Pressing down like a physical weight, she refused to let crush her resolve. Realized the Dominion intended to break through the Central Terran line and drive straight toward Earth. If they succeeded, the planetary shields would fall before reinforcements could arrive. Her pulse quickened, but she forced clarity into her mind. There was no room for hesitation. She redirected the Aurora's Edge and its nearest escorts, forming a barrier directly in the flagship's path. "We hold here," she commanded. No matter the cost, the ensuing clash shook the fleet. Dominion weapons tore through human formations, scattering debris and fire across the void. Yet Ilara's forces endured, not through superior firepower but through sheer unity. Every ship fought with an intensity, fueled by the understanding that losing here meant the end of their species. Ilara's crew trusted her completely, responding to her commands with a precision that transformed desperation into something almost graceful. Even as hull plates ruptured and alarms blared, the Aurora's Edge pressed forward. Drawing closer to Varkun's Leviathan-like vessel, the Dominion flagship fired a concentrated beam that gouged a burning path across the Aurora's Edge's hull. Ilara staggered as the deck lurched, gripping the railing to steady herself. Lieutenant Rowe shouted over the roar of system failures, reporting breaches and failing stabilizers. Smoke filled the air, but Ilara's focus did not waver. She saw the opening she needed, a narrow vulnerability along the flagship's ventral power line. Seizing the moment, she directed her remaining escort ships to converge on the point. Many of them were already damaged, their crews exhausted, but they answered without complaint, accelerating into positions from which they likely would not return. Varkun's voice returned, no longer taunting but edged with disbelief. "You would sacrifice everything? For pride?" Ilara's reply carried a fierce intensity that burned through the comm channels. "Not for pride. For every life your dominion threatens. For every world that refuses to kneel." She gave the final order, before doubt could intrude. "All ships, full impact trajectory." The escort vessels struck first, detonating in a chain of explosions that ruptured the Dominion flagship's shielding. Ilara's breath caught as she recognized the bravery of those who had given everything. The path was open now, brutal but undeniable. The Aurora's Edge surged forward, engines screaming, every remaining system pushed beyond safe limits. Ilara felt a strange calm settle over her as she braced herself. "For Earth," she whispered, and her crew echoed the words with unshaken conviction. The collision struck like a second sun, igniting in the darkness. Light consumed the flagship's hull, tearing through its core. A shockwave rippled across the battlefield, and in its wake the Dominion line faltered. Without Varkun, their formation collapsed into disarray, uncertainty fracturing their discipline. Terran forces rallied in a surge of renewed hope, pushing the enemy back until retreat became their only remaining option. As the remnants of the Dominion fleet fled into the void, the battered Terran ships held their formation, grieving and victorious. Word spread quickly. Ilara Miles had fallen, but she had saved humanity through her final decisive strike. Her name became synonymous with resilience, carrying through every surviving ship like a vow. Though the cost had been profound, humanity remained standing, not because they lacked fear, but because they refused to let it claim them. And as the surviving officers began planning their next steps, they understood the truth Ilara had embodied. The war might be ending, but the future demanded courage. From every soul who still carried her legacy forward, General Varkun appeared across all active channels, his expression sculpted in predatory satisfaction. "Your moment has arrived, Terran," he declared, addressing Ilara directly. "Your species will kneel today, and your world will serve as the lesson that mercy is wasted on the feeble." His voice carried the confidence of someone who had never tasted true resistance, someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. Ilara listened without flinching, her posture rigid but composed. her eyes reflecting the cold determination of someone who had long abandoned illusions of peace. When she finally answered, her voice was steady, cutting through the Dominion's broadcast like a blade of tempered steel. "We stand not because we are unafraid, General, but because we refuse to surrender our right to exist. You call us cowardly because you only understand strength through domination. But strength takes many forms, and you are about to face one you cannot comprehend." Before Varkun could reply, Ilara ended the transmission. She had no more patience for theatrics. Actions would decide everything now. The Dominion fleet surged forward, unleashing a barrage that illuminated the darkness with explosive brilliance. Terran shields flared under the impact, brilliant arcs of energy rippling across their surfaces. As the fleet absorbed the first wave, Ilara issued orders with calm urgency, guiding her forces into a counteroffensive that relied not on brute force but on coordination and adaptability, the very qualities humanity had always depended on for survival. Her ships moved in calculated bursts, slipping between Dominion fire, exploiting minuscule gaps that only a commander intimately familiar with her crew could utilize so effectively. But Varkun anticipated resistance. His flagship advanced with terrifying momentum, dwarfing the ships around it, armed with enough firepower to shatter a small moon. Ilara watched its trajectory and